Good evening, ladies. Welcome to today's training. I've got a special expert with me, Kristi Dosh, who is an expert when it comes to landing PR, speaking, getting more clients, and especially when it comes to women that are authors. And I think we are authors. We just authored a fabulous book called Rise in Pursuit of Empowerment. I'm not sure if you've seen it, Kristi, but you've shot up to, we all got it, shot up to number one on Amazon already within 24 hours in several categories. So we're all super excited, and I think that's a really good step ahead in the right direction in terms of being part of a book and being able to position yourself as an expert. And of course, part of it was of course to help other women as well, because the book is short story of the 25 women who have overcome trauma, challenges, you name it. So they're really sharing their story of how they've actually overcome their challenges in life, and then how they're actually building their business as well. So it's quite a sort of a wide range of audiences, I think. And I've already had some ideas in terms of how we can use the book. But of course, I'd like this to be a sort of a training for those women that may be considering becoming an author, because I'm going to, of course, share it with my other audience, and just to let everyone know that we are going to write another sequel. It's going to be 3 more sequels, because my vision was to actually write a book with 100 women. So the first 25 are done, and I'm going to start doing some calls with future women starting in the next couple of weeks. So I'll leave a link for that as well if you want to become an author. And once you are an author, then this is where Kristi comes in, right? This is her expertise. So she's going to talk. Let me just introduce Kristi very quickly. She is she owns a Guide My Brand, and today we're going to talk about how to leverage your book for publicity that attracts clients. And the 3 things you're going to learn, it's definitely how to position yourself as an expert, which types of publicity make sense for you, and also what you will have to have in your pitch. And we might actually be able to do a bit more of a Q&A, and maybe even individualize some of the things, especially now. It's like, okay, now I have a book, what do I do with it, who can I approach, and so on. So take it away, Kristi. I'm really excited to have you, and thank you so much for coming to share your expertise.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This is my favorite thing to talk about, and I am an author myself, so I love getting to work with other authors. I was actually an author before I did PR. I was a journalist and wrote a couple of books during my time as a journalist, and got to work with the PR department inside of the book publishing companies where I was published. But what I found was, I was published by a large traditional commercial publisher, but as a brand new author, they give you very little assistance. And so I really had to learn how to market my book myself, and then how to leverage my book for paid speaking and for consulting and for all the other things I did with it. So I always tell people that the real money I made on my book wasn't from selling copies of the book, although I did some of that. And I even had like a nice advance from my publisher. But the real money was from paid speaking. And at the time I was doing consulting, so I didn't really have clients, but I think it translates over really well into clients. And I've worked with a number of authors as clients now who've been self-published, who've been with indie publishers, commercial publishers, kind of every way you can get published. And the opportunities that are available to you are really the same no matter how you get published. It's about what you do once you're published. So that's what I want to talk about, is now that you've got the book, you're literally like holding it in your hands, where do you go from here? So let me just make sure I can get my slides to advance here. Okay, so we are going to go through a little bit of how I position my clients as experts. That's important because you're going to, you'll get to sort of see, because I'm going to show you some examples, the actual language I put in pitches to credential my clients. And I pulled a client example for you who's one of my author clients, so that you can see how we did it for her. So we'll talk about this idea of having an expert positioning statement. We'll talk a little bit about what type of publicity is right for you. Is it podcast interviews or guest blogs or speaking or TV? Is it everything? And then I've got a few like pitching tips and tricks to give you that are simple, quick things that I can teach you pretty quickly tonight.
Brilliant.
Okay, so where I want to start, and I know there's a couple of you who are here live, you can nod or put in the chat box. I'm guessing that you know what an elevator pitch is, and maybe you've even got one. I see Suzanne nodding her head, yes. And I although I know you know what an elevator pitch is, I want to go through just quickly and kind of show you the framework for one and what mine looks like, because I want you to see how we take that and add to it to come up with this expert positioning statement. So at a base level, your elevator pitch really is just what you do and who you work with. So mine is, I'm a publicist who works with busy entrepreneurs and authors to establish themselves in their niche and become more visible through traditional and online media opportunities. So that tells you who I work with, entrepreneurs and authors. It tells you what I do. I make them more visible and establish them in their niche through these media opportunities. Does everything an elevator pitch is supposed to do. It's supposed to just quickly get across to somebody. If you're stuck in an elevator with them between floors, or you meet them at a networking event, this is what you say when somebody says, what do you do? But it's not enough to position you as an expert. We position our clients as what we call an expert on their own experience. So you don't have to be the world's foremost expert on your subject. You just have to be an expert on your experience, your journey that got you to where you are. And in putting together this expert positioning statement, you are going to position yourself uniquely because no one else has your story. If you get specific enough, and I always tell people that's kind of the test for the expert positioning statement. When I read your expert positioning statement, I shouldn't be able to think of anyone else I know who could use it. It should be that specific to you. Whereas, as you can see from this elevator pitch, I mean, I can name like 10 people I know off the top of my head in the online space who could use my elevator pitch, that they do the same thing I do, essentially. Selena Sue is a good friend of mine. She does basically the same thing. There's another publicist named Christina Nicholson I do a lot with. She could say the same thing. But then when we get into our expert positioning and we start talking about being this expert on our own experience, it looks really different. Like Selena's path came through connecting with influencers, and she's an introvert. Christina and I were both journalists, but Christina was a TV reporter. I was more of a written reporter. I started my career as an attorney, and then I was a sports business reporter at a major sports outlet. So when we start getting into like the nitty-gritty of our details, we're all really different, and we're coming at it with different experience. So your expert statement is going to position you as this expert on your own experience by showing people, I'm an expert at this because I've already lived it. So mine is, I'm an expert at positioning people and pitching them for media and other visibility opportunities because I was able to do it for myself and transform my career from corporate attorney to national sports broadcaster. So you see how that's so specific? There's no one else I know in the world who could use that. Unlike my elevator pitch, which is very similar to some other publicists I know, I do not know another publicist who started as a corporate attorney and then was a national sports broadcaster. So you want to get to like that level of specificity that when I read it, I can't think of anyone else it fits. And so this is sort of the first exercise I have people do because it helps get them thinking about how and why they're an expert. And it's this simple fill in the blank, you know, I am an expert on what, because why? What's that journey? You know, if you're a health coach, maybe it's because of some sort of illness that you had that you learned to overcome. Or if you've lost a bunch of weight, maybe it's about the exercise and the meal plan that you went through. Or if you are, I'm trying to think of some of our clients that we've got right now. We've got a client who's an expert on viral video because he's had all these videos that have gone viral over the years. So, you know, everybody's expertise is really obviously specific to their journey, but you want to include enough details that it's unique. And this is sort of a miniature version of the expert statement. This is a really like condensed version of your journey. And then what we do from here is expand this a little bit into what we actually put in pitches for clients. So this is actually the first thing we do with our done for you clients is write their expert statement. And for like our coaching clients and our group program clients, we're teaching them how to do it themselves. But I want this nailed because I'm going to show you the longer expert statement in just a second. We literally cut and paste that expert statement into every single pitch we send. It's how we credential and bio the person we're pitching, whether that's pitching them for a podcast interview or for a speaking engagement, a TV appearance, whatever it is. Every single pitch I ever send for that person will have their expert statement in it, because that's how I'm positioning them as not only being authoritative on the subject I'm pitching them for, but when I pitch them as having this very unique journey to learning and mastering, that topic, they become far more interesting to the person on the other side. So the podcast host or the TV producer or the event organizer that's booking speakers, you can really stand out from the other people who are pitching when you have something like this that talks about sort of your journey to where you are and why you do what you do. So I'm going to show you my expert statement, which this one does not include anything on me as an author, because my author experience was really in my last career as a sports journalist. But then I'm going to show you an example of a client who is an author so you can see how we positioned her. I just always think it's helpful. The more examples of this you see, the more you'll sort of understand how to do it for yourself. So I'm going to move my video here so that I can read this. Kristi Dosh is a publicist who founded Guide My Brand to work with entrepreneurs and nonfiction authors to establish themselves as an expert in their niche and become more visible for their expertise through traditional and online media. You'll notice that that first sort of paragraph is almost exactly what I showed you in my elevator pitch. It's that second paragraph where I start this idea of being an expert on my own experience. So Kristi is her own best case study, beginning her career as a corporate attorney and using a combination of blogging, social media, public speaking, media appearances to become a nationally recognized expert on the business of sports. She left the corporate world to work for such outlets as Forbes and ESPN, and today she works with busy entrepreneurs and nonfiction authors who want to become experts themselves and step into the spotlight so they can grow their businesses. So if I'm pitching myself for a speaking, let's say I know that there's a conference coming up and they are going to have a keynote speaker on publicity. And that's happened where I've had people come and they're like, we know we want to do a session on publicity or on book marketing. Can you tell us more about what you could do? I'm going to use this in my pitch to credential myself and to show that I have a unique experience to share. I don't have a degree in publicity. I didn't work in big PR firms. I did work in a boutique agency before I went out on my own, but you'll see I didn't even put that in here because so did a lot of people. Okay, if there are 10 other publicists who all pitched to speak in this spot, the way I'm going to stand out from everyone else who's pitching is by talking about how I'm unique and how my experience is different, because they want to book someone who's interesting. If mine read like more of a academic or corporate bio and it was just like, Kristi has a law degree and after spending 5 years practicing law and working in the media, worked in a boutique PR agency where she learned how to pitch, if I kept it very corporate bios are not great expert statements. If I kept it like that, I'm not going to sound interesting enough to put in front of your audience, whether that's a TV audience or a podcast audience, or it's the audience at an event. They want interesting people who are going to share personal anecdotes, either from their own life or case studies from clients. Think about the people you've heard speak. Some of the best speakers I've heard, they're talking about their own path or they're talking about case studies with clients. We like to hear examples, and they're far more interesting than the more sort of textbook kind of stuff that you get in some speeches and other types of visibility. So the reason I think this expert statement is so important is it not only positions you as having the knowledge to present on your topic, but it shows someone that you've got a unique story to tell around that topic. And that is always going to win the day. People want to book the person who is going to share about their own experiences, whether that's their personal experiences or their client experiences. So I wanted you to see a book one as well. This was a client who did a cookbook, which I think cookbooks are one of the hardest things to pitch. So it's part of why I wanted to show it to you, because this author had no formal experience as a chef. She was just an everyday person who started making desserts for herself, and they were a big hit in the gym that she owned, and it eventually grew into this great cookbook. And so it was very much about positioning her as an expert on her own experience, because she wasn't an expert by like traditional standards. She wasn't a, like classically trained pastry chef or anything. She was just an average person who like cooked with her mom when she was growing up. So this is how we were able to position her. In a recent TEDx talk on sugar addiction, Laura admitted that during her days working in a bakery, she would throw away defective desserts only to fish them out and eat them later. As if that wasn't bad enough, she later learned she was both gluten and dairy intolerant, which is why she felt so miserable all the time. She could have sworn off desserts forever, but instead she researched and tested recipes until she found desserts that were not only easy to make, but also sugar-free, gluten-free, dairy-free, and 100% vegan while still being delicious. Her new cookbook, Sweets in the Raw, was released September 1st and features her signature dessert recipes. In addition to her public speaking, Laura has been featured on segments for shows such as San Diego Living and Good Morning San Diego. She holds a degree in applied body science and owns a fitness studio in San Diego. So when we first started working with Laura, she didn't have the TEDx talk and she didn't have the TV appearances. So those parts just weren't here. Instead, it started with Laura working in a bakery. And I think it just said like, early in her career, Laura worked in a bakery where she would throw away defective desserts. Okay, then she did the TED Talk was the first thing she had. So once she did the TED Talk, we added that in because that was like another layer of credibility. Not only had she now written a book, now she'd written a book and she talked about the journey that led her to the book, which was being a sugar addict. So we added that part in. Well, then we were pitching to TV and we were able to add in that she had done those shows on San Diego Living and on Good Morning San Diego. So you don't have to have any of that stuff to start with. Laura didn't. She had never done anything to be visible ever, nothing. But as we got things, we added those in to beef up this statement because that gives you, those are added layers of credibility. And so I don't want you to feel like you have to have those in the beginning, but as you get them, or if you're someone who already happens to have those, absolutely sprinkle some of the bigger ones in. She had a lot more than this. She ended up having her recipes in like 6 different magazines, and she ended up doing this big cooking series with Williams and Sonoma. You can't list it all because it's going to take up too much space, and hopefully you have so much that it's too much to list it all. So you want to pick out the ones that are kind of most impressive. Most of what we pitched her for was around San Diego, and so we were really emphasizing that she had done the 2 shows in San Diego, that she actually owned a fitness studio in San Diego, because a lot of what she wanted to do was like local cooking classes, so local media was more important to her than necessarily national media. But just kind of gives you an idea of how to work your book into your expert statement.
So could, for example, these ladies have their own story in the book now? So they could maybe take an excerpt and just make it more interesting, and this is how they could stand out. Like, for example, my idea is to offer some corporate talks and some book signing as well. So it's like, you go on LinkedIn, you may want to connect up with some people who might be in HR or talent development or something like that, and then you might want to like send them a quick message, right? So how would you kind of, because there's a limited amount of of words you can use as well to send someone a message. How can you best capture someone's attention? What would you say?
We do still generally send the pitch by email. You do get limited with what you can use on LinkedIn. We will often connect with people on LinkedIn. I do it to pitch myself for speaking, and then we've done it to pitch clients for speaking as well. But we'll send them like a full email pitch. If they're not responding to the email, if we can tell, like I have a tracker, I can tell if they're not opening it, then we'll go on LinkedIn and connect with them just to say, hey, recently sent you an email, would love to connect. That usually prompts them to go search for the email, and then they find it. So I would do it that way. And I'm going to skip a couple of slides ahead because we'll come back to this, but I want you to see, oh no, I was on the right slide. Okay. When you're pitching yourself, you want to make sure that you understand what you're pitching yourself for. So I feel like I shouldn't have to say it, except that I have to, because the feedback that I get, let's just take speaking as an example. I have talked to event organizers, and in fact, I wrote an entire piece for Fast Company one time about why you aren't getting chosen by event organizers. And the feedback we got over and over was that they would get pitches from people who clearly didn't understand who the audience was at the conference or the topics that they generally covered. So let's say it's a tech conference where they cover like the latest in tech, and you pitched yourself for a session on personal branding. Like, people are that far off sometimes. I don't know if it's because they're going into databases and getting huge lists of events and they're just like blasting it out to all of them. But you need to make it really obvious in your pitch that you've done your research. And we usually do that right in the first paragraph. We'll say something like, I heard about your conference through whoever, or I saw your conference up on social media last year, and it looked like you had a fabulous lineup of speakers. I noticed that you covered publicity, but I think a lot of your audience would be interested in book marketing. So I wanted to talk to you about doing a session on book marketing this year. So you want to show that you have seen what the event, because most of these events you're going to pitch yourself for are going to be annual events, or maybe you pitch yourself for like a trade organization that has monthly meetings. In the first paragraph, you just want to make sure you sort of feed back to the person what their organization does and what they're looking for. So like in our podcast pitches, we'll say, we know you like having guests on who can talk about working smarter, not harder. We'll sort of summarize what we know their event or their organization is about right in the first paragraph, so that we're proving to them we did our research. That's going to keep them reading, because I guarantee you anyone you're pitching is going to get a lot of bad pitches every day. And so if you can prove to them right off the bat that you've done your homework and you know who they are and what kind of topics they like to cover or what audience they cater to, they're going to be like, okay, and they're going to keep reading because they know that you've done your research and that the rest of it is going to be on point. And that's really key, is to get them to keep reading. Then you're going to have to prove in your pitch that you have designed an idea with their audience in mind, that if you're pitching something and it's about leaving your 9 to 5 and the audience is full, the conference is meant to help people like advance from middle management to CEO. Well, they don't want you talking their people into leaving and quitting their 9 to 5. You'd be surprised how many people pitch ideas that it's like, okay, the event organizers are never going to let you speak, because that's not what they're trying to accomplish with the audience. So you've really got to prove to them in the pitch that you've done your research, you understand who they cater to, and you've developed an idea that fits their audience really well.
I have an example of that.
Oh, good.
But this is through a friend. I mean, I was talking to him. I said, hey, you do your annual conferences, don't you? I mean, now I could come with the book and I could speak about women in leadership. He said, yeah, but most people will be men in the audience.
Yeah, see?
Now we'll just talk about leadership then, generally.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so it's just making sure, and like with a lot of conferences, there'll be like a theme every year. So make sure you pay attention. And if you don't know what it is, I mean, some of our initial outreach for speaking events is reaching out and saying, we saw your conference last year, super interested in speaking at it this year. Have you chosen a theme? Or when will you open for speaking proposals? Like, sometimes that initial email is just, you're still in the fact gathering stage. You're not even pitching yourself yet. And they will appreciate that. They will appreciate that you are doing your homework and trying to learn more before you send them a pitch that's totally off topic. So look back and see, okay, if you know you're interested in this event because you know that's the type of person you want to be in front of, look back at not just last year, try to find the conference agendas for like the last few years and make sure you're pitching something they haven't covered yet, but that fits in their sort of universe. It takes a lot of research. I always tell people that's how we get hired for Done For You. It's not because we do anything any differently than what I'm teaching you. It's just that people are paying us to do the legwork, because it's a lot of legwork sometimes. And then in your pitch, the most important thing, if you do get nothing else right in your pitch, if you just get this part right, it's all that matters. You've got to lead with value. You've got to make it abundantly clear in the pitch the value the audience is going to walk away with. Everyone I've ever talked to, podcast host, TV producer, event organizer, they all tell me they care less about who you are and way more about what their audience is going to get from you. And they'll say that a lot of the pitches they get start out right away with the person talking about themselves. And that's why I told you, start your pitch with feeding back to them who they are and what they want. I never start, like, I've got some impressive stuff I could throw out at the beginning, but I never start my pitches with, I'm a corporate attorney who became ESPN's only female sports business reporter, and I've written for Forbes, an entrepreneur, and Fast Company, and I've been quoted in the New York Times and the Washington Post. I mean, I could throw out a lot of stuff that sounds like fairly impressive. They don't really give a crap. It helps credential me, and it is useful to include some of that later in my pitch, but I never, ever, ever, ever start a pitch talking about myself, ever, because they don't care. They care that you're providing value to their audience. So if you can start your pitch by proving to them you know who their audience is, then what I do is sort of set up, okay, here's a problem. So like, for example, a speaking engagement I pitch myself for a lot, or a topic I really just pitch around, not just for speaking, but for everything, is that a study was done a few years ago, and it showed only 19% of experts in the media, featured in the media, are women. 19%. That's it. And my first thought was like, oh, we're being discriminated against. But it's actually that women don't pitch themselves. So producers and radio hosts and event organizers don't have women to choose from because women aren't pitching themselves. So when I'm pitching myself, I sort of set that up as, okay, look, there's a problem. The problem is women aren't pitching themselves. Then I start positioning the solution. You know, the solution is women have to start seeing themselves as an expert. And I'll sort of launch into, I'm going to teach your audience how to start positioning themselves as an expert and how to start really feeling it for themselves. And I'll kind of flesh that out. Then I talk about me and why I'm qualified to speak about it. So I'm like third in the pitch, not first. So prove to them you know their audience, outline some sort of problem or issue that you're going to speak on. Then you credential yourself as the person to speak about it. That's that expert statement. I literally cut and paste that expert statement right into my pitch, but it's pretty far. It's like 75% of the way down the pitch. And actually, I'll pull a pitch up on the screen and show you guys what a full pitch looks like, because that's probably easier than explaining it. But do not, if you get nothing else from this, the two things I want you to remember, do not start out talking about yourself, and make sure you make it abundantly clear the value the audience is going to walk away from. I even reword it again at the end, and I'll pull up a pitch and show you. And at the end, I'll say, your audience will walk away knowing how to fill in the blank. And I'll summarize whatever I've already said in the pitch. You know, your audience will walk away knowing how to position themselves as an expert so they can get more PR. That way, the person on the other end isn't like guessing, like, is my audience going to get anything out of this? No, you've like hit them upside the head with it and told them, your audience is going to learn this from me. And that is what they care about more than anything. And it's the number one reason I think pitches fail, is that people don't make clear in the pitch what the audience is going to learn. And that's regardless of what type of publicity we're talking about: speaking, podcast interview, writing a guest blog, whatever kind of publicity you're considering going out there and getting. Positioning the value is the most important. And then we talked about positioning yourself uniquely. That's with the expert statement. And then always promise to share whatever it is with your audience. Say you're going to share it on social media, that you're going to share it with your newsletter, because people want to know you're going to help promote their thing, whether that's their podcast or their TV show or their event. So you just want to make sure you kind of throw in at the end, I'd be happy to share this with my audience. If you've got an impressive audience, you've got a big following, or you've got a big email newsletter, put the number in there. But if you don't, then just promise to share it with your audience, and you don't necessarily have to put a number. I'm going to stop the slide share just because I really want to show you guys a pitch I hadn't planned on doing. I try not to show pitches, but I'm going to. Let me get you a current client I have that I have permission to share.
I was just about to say, I think it's so true that this is also how we should structure our sales pages, because it's really about leading with value and leading with what problems you might have, like as a client.
Yeah.
And then they will read on, because literally by that stage, they're not really interested about you yet. It's about what can you do for me, and that's why you want to grab their attention
Right.
in the first sort of 10, 20 seconds.
I wanted to find a really good one where I don't have to like explain anything weird that's going on. So, okay, here we go. Here's a good how to pitch. This is a client who has a she calls it the sober school. She coaches women on how to quit drinking. So let me pull this up on the screen so I can show you how we positioned her. Well, actually, you know what? Hold on. I'll pull up a book client. That's better. Hold on. I know exactly who I can pull up. Now, this client happens to have done some really good publicity before she came to us, so you'll see some of that linked in here. But again, I don't want you to feel like you have to have that to start out with. She just happened to already have it when she came to us. Here is a radio pitch we did for her. This should be a good one. Let's see. Just want to make sure I get a really good one. That is not a really good one. That was too specific. That's kind of a weird one because it was around breaking news. Let me pull agents here. Sorry, all the ones I'm opening are like really weird, really specific ones. Flux. Let's pull up this one. Well, let me show you Kate's real quick while I've got it up on my screen because it's an easy one to follow. Share the right thing. Here we go. Okay, you can ignore the first paragraph. That's more for my team. Okay, so I told you we feed back to the person what they want. So this is a really good example of that. And my client, and this shouldn't have my client, Kate B, would be an excellent guest for your podcast. We understand you like guests who can share actionable advice on how to live your best life. So that we change out on every pitch. So we'll, like this portion I'm highlighting right here, we will look at how the podcast describes itself because we can't listen to every podcast we pitch a client for. We pitch dozens every week, but we'll read their description on iTunes. We'll look through like the last 10 episodes and get an idea. So this was obviously a podcast that was all about living your best life. So that part we would change out in each pitch and feed back to them. We know you like guests who can do what. And then Kate has an inspiring story of going from social overdrinker to sober and has truly started living her best life. Okay, this is her expert statement right here. This goes in, well, and actually it goes on down through here. This is in every single pitch we send for her, no matter what kind of publicity it is. Growing up in the era of Sex and the City and Bridget Jones, Kate B believed her drinking was simply what successful independent women did. After all, she was a journalist and TV producer for the BBC. Drinking after work was how people socialized, except she was tired of feeling hungover and ashamed about what she felt like more drinking than was healthy. When Kate decided to get sober, she was disappointed to find the only real support was through AA. She attended a few meetings but left feeling like she didn't fit in because she was getting sober before her drinking had negatively impacted her work or relationships. But there was no middle ground. It seemed like you either didn't have a real problem or you had to be a full-blown alcoholic to get help. That's why Kate founded the Sober School, a coaching program that helps women to feel inspired and empowered by their decision to quit drinking. She helps women who are ready to start living their best life learn how to do it without a glass of wine in hand. And then we want to tell them that we've done our research. Remember I said, prove you've done your research. So based on the topics you've covered previously, we would like to propose Kate join you to share her top tips on living your best life alcohol-free. So we really do look back, like once we've sort of decided, okay, this would be a good angle for this podcast, we will like search on their podcast website and make sure it hasn't been covered before. Because the worst is sending a pitch and they email you back and say, yeah, we just did that last month with somebody else. It just makes you look like you haven't done your research. So we will look back and see, have they ever had a guest talk about being alcohol-free before? And if so, you can still pitch it, but we'd need to find a unique angle. We need to know what that person talked about, and we need to talk about something different. And sometimes we'll even acknowledge that in the pitch. We'll say, I know you had a guest on a couple of months ago who talked about living alcohol-free or going alcohol-free during the holidays. Kate wants to come on and talk about being alcohol-free all year. We'll just try to find a little bit different angle than the other person talked about. And then we give a few a few bullets on things that she can talk about on the podcast. And then this is what I was talking about a second ago. We always have a line like this. Listeners will walk away with what? You're reminding them the value the audience is going to get. So listeners will walk away with knowledge on how they too can be happy and sober. They'll also draw motivation and inspiration from Kate's story. And then I told you this part just a second ago. She's happy to share the interview and spread the good word about your podcast to her loyal community. So that's all the pieces I sort of talked to you about. Now, podcasts are a little different in the way we set them up. Every pitch is a tiny bit different. For example, let me show you another one for her. Podcasts, we always start by feeding them back what they're looking for and the types of guests that they've had before. But let me show you a different one for her. Hopefully it changed screens for you guys. So this one was where we were pitching a writer to quote Kate or to use her as an expert source. Actually, this is not a good example. Hold on. That did not have what I was looking for. Some of it is my team just started moving some things around and what I'm looking for is not where I thought it was going to be. Let me find... Actually, here's somebody that'll be a good example. Let's try this one. Okay, did that change to where you can see one that's got yellow highlighting?
Nope.
No, okay, hold on. Let me stop the share and then share the correct screen here. Okay, this is a client who's a ghostwriter. So a lot of our pitches outside of podcasts are a little bit different. We always start by kind of feeding them back what kind of guests they like to have, because podcast hosts have told us over and over and over, they want us to prove at the very beginning of our pitch that we know what their podcast is about, because podcast hosts more than anybody get a lot of really bad pitches. But we usually like to start with what I call a shocking or surprising stat or fact, where we're setting up some sort of issue or problem and then how our client's gonna show you the solution to it. So this is a good example from our client who's a ghostwriter. So it starts out, did you know that more than 80% of published books are estimated to have been ghostwritten? There are countless entrepreneurs who want to publish books and have worked hard in their careers to become experts on knowledge worthy of publishing. However, they don't know where to start, what to put where. I don't know why that doesn't have an H. And how to tie it all together into something people actually want to buy. Book publishing is worth $120 billion globally. The industry rewards preparation, not motivation. Our client, Joshua Lysek, founder of the Entrepreneur's Wordsmith, would like to write a piece. This is a pitch for a guest blog. And we would fill this in and put, would write a piece for Forbes entitled, and we would put a suggested headline based on the types of headlines that Forbes generally has. And then in this piece he would cover, and it would just be a short, 1-sentence summary of the idea. And then I won't read it all, but here's his expert statement. That's why it's the first thing we write, because then we drop it into every pitch as the way that we credential and bio the person. And then I told you, we always say your readers will walk away knowing how to, and then he'd be happy to share it with his social media and his newsletter subscribers. So the pitches look a little different for TV versus a podcast versus a speaking opportunity. And there is no one way to pitch. I know other publicists who teach it in a different format. There's not one way to do it, but I can tell you that the two things you've got to have in there, let me go back to my slides here. Oops, I went back to my slides, but it didn't share it with you. Let's do a share. And then go back to current slide. Let me go back. Whoops. Does not want to go full screen. There we go. Sorry, I went too far. Okay. But the two things I think you absolutely have to do are prove that you've done your research and then prove the value. If you do nothing else in your pitch, you have got to show them what the value the audience is going to walk away with. You can put it in whatever order you want and play around with it however you want. If you don't get across to them in that email the value the audience is going to walk away with, they aren't going to book you for whatever it is. I don't care what type of publicity it is. So your pitch doesn't have to look just like mine, and all of mine get tweaked and look a little bit different, but the same basic pieces are in there. We always prove that we've done our research. We always show the value. We always position ourselves or our client uniquely with that expert statement. And then we always promise to help them promote whatever their thing is, their podcast or their event or whatever it is. If you start pitching and you're not getting yeses, then I think you have one of these three problems. You either haven't zoned in on what is unique or compelling about your story, which hopefully you all have because you've already shared your story in a book. So I think you guys are already past that hurdle, whereas some people I'm talking to are still trying to figure out, like, what's my story and what's my thing? I think most of you are probably there because you wrote about it in the book. So I think you can nail that piece, and you'll do that in your expert statement. So then if you're not getting yeses, you're either pitching to the wrong places, like Sabine was talking about, you're pitching to an all-male audience for an all-female topic. You got to make sure that you know who the audience is and you're pitching a topic that works for that audience, or you're giving up too fast. I think the biggest mistake people I see make when they're doing their own publicity is that they send out their pitches and then they hear nothing back and they just assume no one wants them. Not the case at all. You have to follow up. I would say 10 to 14 days after you send the initial pitch, send a follow-up email. And normally what we do is forward the original email so they don't have to like hunt around their inbox for it. And we just write 1 or 2 sentences in the new email that says, you wanted to follow up on my pitch below, would love to get started on a draft of this blog for you. Something really simple like that to bump it back up to the top of their inbox, because they might have missed it the first time. Maybe they get a ton of email every day. Maybe they read your email on the subway and then they got distracted by a phone call and they never went back to it. Or they read your email walking down the hallway and then somebody started talking to them. There are a million reasons why someone didn't email you back, and only one of those reasons was that they were going to say no. So give them that opportunity by following up. We have tracked it in our agency over the last few years. We land over 60%. It's like 62 or 63% of everything we land for clients on the follow-up email. So more than half of what we land for clients, we land on the follow-up email. If we weren't sending follow-ups, imagine like what a crappy job we would be doing for our clients, because we wouldn't be getting nearly as much coverage. And I think that when people are pitching themselves, when you don't hear back, one, you automatically assume it's a no, and you get in your head and you get these feelings of like rejection. And so you don't send the follow-up email. You don't want to be a bother. You don't want to annoy people, or you feel like you've already been rejected. And so I think the vast majority of people who pitch themselves don't ever send a follow-up email. So I implore of you, send the follow-up email. We keep a spreadsheet when we pitch for clients, and it's got a column that says date sent, where we put the day we send the initial pitch, and the very next column says follow-up date, so that if we haven't heard back from them, we sort of calendar 10 to 14 days later to send that follow-up email. So I implore of you, if you start pitching yourself and you're getting frustrated, or you're kind of down in the dumps because you're not hearing back, make sure you're sending those follow-ups. And I will be happy to stick around and answer as many questions as you have. I know I threw a lot at you, and there's so much more I could have thrown at you. But I'm happy to.
The last bit was like a reminder, because I think we read into people not answering us, and I think it was just a reminder that yes, there are many reasons why people are not actually replying. Because I notice as well on LinkedIn, these people reading my messages, but then they're not replying. So yeah, I have now the confidence that I will just have another follow-up.
It probably pops up on their phone and they're like, oh, it's too hard to like type back a long message on my phone. I'll do it when I get back to my computer. They totally forget when they get back to their computer. I do it all the time.
Yeah. So I think, I know, Kristi, you're doing a program. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then obviously we'll want to answer some questions as well with regards to specifically what the authors have as well on other things, I guess.
If you all want sort of a extended, bigger version of kind of the mini training I just did here, a couple of weeks ago, I did a 4-day live stream series. They're about a half hour each day, where I broke all of this down more in depth because I had more time. So if this interested you and you want to like dig into it a little bit deeper, if you go to that address on the screen, guidemybrand.com/free training, that has the replays of all 4 videos. I did not sell a thing until the last few minutes of the final video. And in that last few minutes of the final video, I was doing a pitch into my group program, which teaches you how to pitch yourself. So that expert statement is the very first module, teaching you how to do that. But then we go into how do you find the opportunities? Like, how do you build out a pitch list? How do you find where the speaking gigs are or which podcast makes sense for you? And then how do you figure out who to contact? And then the next module is sort of, okay, now what do you say to them now that you know who to contact? And it's got my pitch formula and kind of the stuff I generally have in a pitch. And then there's individual modules on podcast pitching. There's one on TV pitching. There's one on guest blog and magazine pitching. There's one on how to use Haro, help a reporter out to pitch yourself as a source to writers and reporters. There's a brand new module that's on book marketing. There's a module that's on public speaking. So sort of anything you want to do in the publicity and visibility space, there is a training on it. And I do live weekly office hours in that program for an hour where people can come ask me questions, run something by me. If you write a pitch and you want us to take a look at it, you just post it in the group, and me or the other publicist on my team, Megan, will take a look at it. We'll give you like line by line edits. If you're trying to find a contact at a publication and you can't find it, you post it in the group and we'll find it for you. So although it is sort of do-it-yourself publicity, there's a ton of support from us. And my launch actually ends tomorrow, but I know some of you will be watching this on the replay. And I told Sabine earlier, I'm happy to keep it open for you all for like another week because I had awesome bonuses with this one where I will write 3 pitches for you that you can use like over and over. It's like 3 different styles of pitches. And you'll be able to make tiny tweaks to it and use it over and over. I'll build out your initial pitch list with 20 opportunities that are tailored just for you. We'll do a one-on-one call where we'll talk through strategy for an hour, and then you'll have Voxer access to me for 3 months. And that's all in addition to like what you would normally get with the program. So if you're feeling like this is something that you need help implementing, I think that's probably the best option, unless you're ready for like full done for you, which is like a much bigger retainer. This is usually kind of where people start out at. And then once they start getting publicity and getting more clients and their business grows, then they, come back to us and they do the bigger retainers. But I do this open enrollment a couple of times a year, and I just happen to be right at the end of it right now. Sabine got in touch with me about doing a training for you guys. And I was like, oh, it's right at the end of my open enrollment. So I want to make sure you guys knew about it if you want that resource. But if you just want some free training, there's 4 training videos that are in there you can go back and watch that kind of expand on everything I talked about here. And there's a couple of topics I didn't have time to cover here. So those will be up for like the next week before we take them. My team will take the whole landing page down, but I'll make sure they keep it up for the next week.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And if you have questions now, I'll stick around for as long as you've got questions.
Okay. Yeah. So ladies, feel free to unmute.
Me, I have a question. Me.
Let me my screen share and turn on just my video here. Okay.
I'm in my dressing gown and my hair is horrific because our boiler has broken down, which is why I had no video. So, hi guys, this is the unfiltered version of me. Hi. You're right. So my question for you was, by the way, that was an awesome training. I actually really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It was kind of, so what I'm doing is quite different to what a lot of 25-year-olds in the business space are doing. I'm trying to encourage people to grow their groceries basically around their house and especially in their front garden. So very, very different to what most people are doing. And I've had quite a lot of kind of local magazines and stuff like that approach me saying, would you like to write for us? Would you like to do an article, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of it is kind of free, or even there's a couple of like paid for opportunities where I'm paying to put myself in the magazine. Are there paid opportunities for doing writing in a space like that in articles and magazines, or not? Is that not something to expect?
No, I think there would be, so I would not, generally speaking, we tell clients not to pay for publicity opportunities. Every once in a while you come across like a TV station or a podcast that wants you to pay to be on. We don't pay for any of our clients to be on. Just most of our clients don't feel like they can like directly track the return on investment. So it's tough to recommend that. There are outlets that will, pay you to write. It's usually going to be bigger, like print publications. Like for example, I have a client that's written a couple of times now for Shape magazine because she does corporate wellness. So she's written a couple of times in Shape magazine. I've done a ton of freelance writing for Men's Health and Women's Day and Parents and Glamour, and all that was paid. So that's more pitching yourself as a freelance writer. When you do it like that, they will pay you to write for them, but they are not going to let you mention your business.
Okay.
Because that's seen as more like advertising. If you really want to support the business, you'd be better off pitching writers who already write for those publications to feature you as a source. So we've got a pitch that we show people how to do for that, where you're pitching yourself as a source and saying, hey, I'm an expert at this thing. If you're ever working on articles about this, I would love to serve as a resource. And that way they're quoting you. And usually when that happens, they can link to your website or to your book or to your landing page. So it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is just to make money, then yeah, you can get paid writing. If your goal is to grow your business, you might be better off pitching other people to write about you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I'm quite interested in both, but thank you so much for making that distinction, because that makes a lot more sense now. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And it can, like my client, Rena, who wrote for Shape, she's written for Shape magazine and Working Mother magazine and a couple of others that she's gotten paid to write for, where she wasn't really talking about her business. But she did it because she was positioning herself as an expert on corporate wellness in order to get paid speaking gigs at companies. So now when she pitches herself to, say Google to come in and do a corporate wellness training, she can say, I've been published with Shape and Working Mother. It's a way to credential herself for her speaking. And I've written for Forbes for a decade now. I get the vast majority of my paid speaking gigs from people who find my writing on Forbes. So even though in the beginning, actually, I didn't get paid anything to write for Forbes, now they pay just a tiny bit. That's not enough to even know you're getting paid. I don't do it because Forbes pays me. I do it because the Forbes writing has led to tons of paid speaking and consulting, because Forbes ranks so high for SEO. So no matter how much work I do on my website, I'm never going to rank higher than Forbes. So I'm better off writing for them, because people, when they do an organic search, will come across that. And that's how I get a lot of my paid speaking and consulting. So it's there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, as they say.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think just sort of zoning into having a book, I think it's a stepping stone to kind of position yourself as an expert. And I guess the fact that, it was, or he is still, I think he's an Amazon bestseller, does help as well to kind of open the doors, isn't it? And I think we need to start sort of using that and using
put that in your pitch. You want to say that in your pitch. You want to say, I am the best-selling author of the book, and then link to the book. So that's another, kind of like I showed you my client Laura, and we talked about her TEDx speech, and we talked about that she'd been on those 2 TV shows in San Diego. You're going to use, I'm the best-selling author of this book as one of your credentialing tools. So that's how you can leverage the book to get additional coverage from outlets. And having a book makes it easier to pitch for speaking. Having that, they like to book, they like to book speakers who have a book. And same thing for pitching yourself as an expert source for writers and reporters to quote. They like quoting authors. So definitely make sure that's in your pitch.
Brilliant. I think that's really good. Any other questions, ladies? Feel free to unmute.
I taught you everything you need to know. You have no questions.
I'd just like to say, I think you've been just really very clear, and it's given us a good overview of the most important things to consider. We were talking earlier today with Sabina about getting sort of like corporate gigs, so to speak, with regard to talking about business with the book, and to do things like book signing. So I suppose from my point of view, the best way of getting into a corporate organisation, that was is what I would be thinking about
Yeah,
in terms
absolutely.
of public speaking, because I've done some work, for instance, for myself. I work in the stress and anxiety area, so I run programs, and I've worked in the public sector for my local authority. So I'm quite interested to see how I could possibly get into more local councils to give inspiration, not just to women but also to men, just for putting themselves forward and living through their dreams within the organisation that they're at, because a lot of the people who work in the public sector have been there for many years. These are people who go in there and expect to stay there for life. Now, we know that doesn't really happen in the private sector at all, but there is still an element of that in the public sector and in local authorities. So I'm just thinking, how can I use this book to get into more councils and talk to people there who really need to be uplifted?
Yeah, I would start when I identify an organization that I want to speak in front of. I'll try to find just on their website a point of contact that I can reach out to and say, I'm very interested in what your organization is doing. And if I have like a specific reason, like I reach out a lot because I started my career as a lawyer to like bar associations and groups of lawyers or groups of legal marketers. So I'll explain like what my connection is to it and why that organization interests me. But then I'll just say, I'm inquiring as to whether you ever invite in speakers. If so, I'd love to know more about, what types of speakers you bring in or what types of sessions you do. Like law firms do a lot of like lunch and learn kind of things.
Yeah.
My first email will be sort of how do you engage with speakers? Because I'd love to send you more information about what I can speak on. So with speaking, more so than the other types of publicity, I'll do that sort of initial get to know you outreach before I send them information on what I can speak on, because I want to know more about the format. Like if they only bring in speakers for their annual event versus they bring in one every month for a lunch and learn. Like sometimes you can't find that on I try to dig around on their website and see if I can figure it out on my own. But if I can't, then I'll just reach out to somebody and ask. And people are usually really appreciative that you're trying to do your homework before you pitch them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you.
That's brilliant. I think that's
and then when you pitch them, include that you're the author of a best-selling book.
Yes.
Exactly, because I think we kind of try to give them a solution straight away, and what Kristi just said is right? Just ask them some questions.
Yeah.
And you'll be more likely to get some answers.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Really quickly ask, if the book that you wrote, like I did with Sabine, was when you were doing a different business to the one you're doing now, I guess what I'm asking is anyone going to read it, or can you just put yourself down as a bestseller?
You can still say you're the best-selling author. Like I wrote a book about the business of college football, which is a holdover from my last career when I was a sports business reporter. It has nothing to do with being a publicist now, but there's still instances when I wouldn't always include it in my pitch. It would depend on what I was pitching, but there are instances when I would still include it because it's still a big accomplishment to have written a book and to be a bestseller. And so I still think it's appropriate to include it. Now, you're not probably going to go into a lot of detail on the book, but you can't, like sometimes I just say that I'm the published author of a best-selling book, and I don't even say the title of the book because it has nothing to do with what I'm pitching, but I'll at least put in that kind of general information.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Really
You're welcome.
So why are you changing your business halfway through the book, Victoria?
Thanks for taking on the spot, Sabine.
I know.
So,
but at least you found your passion now, and you're totally aligned now. That's great.
Yeah, I just found what lit me up. That's all.
Exactly. That's better than suffering in silence for years of doing something that you're not passionate about.
Yeah, well, if you want to know the real reason, I just found the right coach for me, Sabine.
Sorry? Say that again?
I just found the right coach for me.
Oh yeah, and that would be me, isn't it? All right. Okay, ladies. Thank you so much. If there's no more questions, then obviously I don't want to keep you much longer. And I totally appreciate that Kristi's, come and share. And here you can see what kind of expert she is. She's very, very thorough. I mean, it's been, it's been just mind blowing, the information that you shared, and so detailed. So I'm sure we can all take a piece away, and of course, you know where to find Kristi, and I'm sure people can just get in touch as well and ask you questions in terms of
Absolutely.
how do you work and stuff like this as well. And definitely PR is probably one of the things we need to do. We need to actually, this was just a starting point. We've just launched. This is just it's like the baby is born and now we have to feed it, we have to grow. We don't just want to shelve it and just have it there and sort of gather dust. We want to use it and we want to grow our businesses. And of course, we want to share the book with people. And one of the things we did is in the book is we've actually shared the websites of every woman as well. So it's got sort of a double whammy as well in terms of if we can not only grow our expertise, but we can also spread the book. It will have an exponential leverage effect.
Absolutely.
So, good.
Thanks for having me. And thanks, ladies, for such great questions. And I would love to hear from any of you. If you ever need anything, just let me know.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
All right, bye. Thanks, ladies.
Bye, ladies.
Bye. Bye.